Utos un proseuches the humes, pater hemon, ho en tois uranois, hagiaste to onamasu, elthato he basileasu, genetheto to thelemasu, hos en urano kai epiges. Ton arton hemon ton epiusion, dos hemen semeron, kai aphes hemen ta ophelema ta hemon, hos kai hemes afekamen tois opheletais hemon. Kai me esenenkes hemas eis perasmon, ala hrusa hemas apo tu poneru.
Despite the fact that Greek and Latin are both dead languages, Dr. Ham has revived them ever since she joined EA 2 years ago as the head of the classics department. She earned her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. She studied abroad in Greece on both the Fulbright Fellowship and the National Endowment for the Humanities grant. She also taught at Bucknell University and the Rye Country Day School before joining the EA community. Please stand to greet Dr. Ham.
Thank you. Please be seated. During every chapel, we recite the Lord's Prayer, and you probably know it by heart. You perhaps even don't have to think about what you're saying as you say the words. But today, I want us to really stop and reflect on this prayer, and in particular, the two lines, "Forgive us our trespasses," or our debts, or in some versions, our sins, as we forgive those who trespass against us, or sin against us, or simply our debtors. To give due credit, what I'm going to say today arises out of a discussion with the students in my advanced Greek class last year. After that class, I approached the Reverend Squire and said I thought I had a potential chapel talk on why I say debts and debtors, and then I sort of have to pause and let the rest of y'all catch up with me. And he looked at me in all earnestness and said, "You're a Presbyterian, aren't you?" Well, yeah, I am, but that's not really why. It has to do with the original Greek word ophelema, and an expansive notion of morality contained therein. That is to say, a notion of moral behavior that moves beyond the "thou shalt not" to a notion of positive duty or action. Before turning to the Lord's Prayer itself, let's put in the context of the previous Greek culture, because let's face it, I can't resist. In classical Greek culture, there are a couple of terms for moral transgression or sin that are worth note here. And the one that you've perhaps heard before is hubris. And now for an audience participation portion. Can anyone tell me what hubris means? Shout it out.
Pride.
Pride. Pride is, yes, good job. And he should take pride in knowing that. Pride is the most common definition, but pride can be ambiguous, because sometimes pride's a good thing. School pride, booyah. But arrogance sort of gets closer to the meaning, because it really picks up on the negative sense of hubris. But the original sense goes up beyond even that. If I were to walk up to you in the hall and punch you in the face, the charges you would bring me up on would be hubris in ancient Greece. In Greece, hubris was that legal technical term for assault, that is, for violently transgressing on another person. And then in religious context, it comes to mean to violently transgress on the rights of the gods. That is, to start acting and thinking that you're a god, that you're above mere mortal laws. And thus it comes to be understood as arrogance, but that native core meaning is to transgress, to cross some boundary you really shouldn't. The other sin word that stands out in my mind from classical Greece is hamartia. And the core sense of this meaning is to miss one's mark, to go astray, to transgress whether or not you intended to. Originally, it could even refer to archery. I mean, it literally means you missed your target, dude. And then it comes to mean moral action. You missed your target in that sense. Unlike hubris, hamartia crosses from classical Greek thought into Judeo-Christian thought and becomes the main word for sin in biblical Greek. It occurs 173 times in the New Testament alone. Whole lot of sin going on there. Both these words, however, evoke a really narrow sense of morality, one that simply focuses on wrong action, that one has done something one shouldn't. These sorts of actions are known as negative duties. you have a duty not to kill, not to rob, not to covet thy neighbor's iPad. If you do a wrong action, you've committed hamartia or hubris. But in the Lord's Prayer, Matthew, in translating Jesus' Aramaic words, does not use hamartia, but uses ta ophelemata for debts or trespasses, and tois opheletais for trespassers or debtors. In this, he opens up the notion of morality beyond not doing. These Greek words have an ophele root that arises originally from an economic context, a literal debt owed, like rent, tuition, what have you. The ophele words become associated to moral thought through a sense of a debt owed to someone for an offense, and thus it can be linked back to a transgression. And in some religious contexts, there's a sense of a debt owed God, either for a religious vow or in the more general sense that all creation owes a debt to the Creator that can never be repaid. And just as the word ophelemata has an economic sense, so does the word forgive. To forgive debts can be to grant relief from payment as much as to give up resentments or moral claims on another. In the New Testament, these ophele words, or debt words, occur frequently both in that literal economic sense as well as in a moral sense. So how are we to understand Matthew's word choice here? In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus is providing a model for regular daily prayer, and I'm an optimist. I optimistically think that most of us can usually avoid actively doing wrong on a daily basis. If you take an inventory of your actions so far today, you have probably avoided killing, robbing, cheating, coveting that iPad. You may have done nothing morally wrong so far today. So the daily prayer focuses not on what you have done wrong, but rather on what you may have failed to do, failed to act where morality required actions. That is, your debts. This view of morality asks us not only to avoid doing certain things, but also to act in certain ways. For example, are you as morally culpable for letting someone die when you could save him or her as you would be for killing her? Just as thou shalt not kill is considered a negative duty, taking action to save someone's life is considered a positive duty. If you see someone drowning and could save him or don't, or you know your friend is just totally wasted and you let her get in the car and drive off anyway, those inactions are moral, or rather immoral choices. Paradoxically, a choice not to act can itself be an action for which you are liable or indebted. It may be more difficult, however, to define one's positive duties than it is to define the negative ones. What are the limits of our responsibilities, of our required moral actions? And here is where I intersect with this year's chapel theme, specifically the theme of love. Later in Matthew, when Jesus is asked which is the greatest commandment, he replies, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments." These set forth for us a very expansive basis for defining our positive duties. I say these because I don't think that Jesus saw them as separate. The love we show one another is, in a way, the love we show God. Jesus later says in Matthew that how you treat the least of humanity is to treat God in that way. To quote the response, "Then the righteous will ask him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you?' And the king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did to the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" So what do we owe those around us? As much love and care as we show for ourselves. Do we fully live up to this on a daily basis? I would surmise that most of us, myself included, do not. While we may regularly fulfill our negative duties, most of us are left in debt when it comes to those positive duties. Now, right now, you're probably thinking of charitable acts like Jesus listed in that last passage. And these are part of our positive duties. And while I do give to the poor and hungry, to those displaced by natural or man-made disasters, while I have worked in a food pantry or a clothing pantry, while I do strive to love my neighbors as myself, I know how very short I fall. I've been blessed enough to know some truly selfless individuals who lead modest lives in which they give to those around them as much as to themselves, but I can't make any such claims myself. And yet, while I stand here today and encourage charitable acts, I do also want you to think about how you treat those seated around you, your neighbors. Have you shown love for them as you would yourself? Even the smallest interactions call for us to focus on one another as individuals and to treat each other with kindness and consideration. While the big gestures often grab our attention, it is the small daily actions that define who we are. So, when you recite the Lord's Prayer in chapel, I invite you to be conscious of your words and reflect on what you're saying. It does not matter if Christianity is not your religious tradition. The notions contained in these lines are universal. If you're Jewish, recall that Matthew was quoting Leviticus 19:18 when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and that it has been said in the Talmud, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." That is the whole Torah. The rest is explanation. Go and learn. If you are Muslim, reflect on what one of the hadiths says, that none of you truly believes until he wishes for his brother what he wishes for himself. For Hindus, the Mahabharata defines dharma in this way, and beyond religious tradition, the golden rule is a recognized ethical maxim. Take the moment of the Lord's Prayer to reflect on your debts and how you can strive to meet those debts better each day. Because morality is not just the achieving of right action, but the daily striving for it. Thank you.